Hey guys, welcome back to Saving Green. Today we have a special episode that talks about new regulatory changes that may change how net metering goes in the future. So stick around and we'll figure out what the FERC is going on. Alright, so today we're talking about net metering. Net metering is a process that we talked about in previous episodes where utility companies create a little monitor or meter that keeps track of how much energy solar rooftops are generating and how much you're giving back to the grid if you're generating excess energy production than what you may be consuming. Now, this process has been around for a long time, and it's mostly regulated by local utility companies under guidance by state and local jurisdictions to decide how much per kilowatt hour the utility company is buying back from the production of each solar panel. And the reason why it's been this way is because of a few acronyms and important government agencies that we should just touch on briefly. The first is the FERC. The FERC is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and this was started in the 70s as a division of the Department of Energy, where the federal government would regulate interstate energy production, transmission, and basically determine what the price of natural gas and oil would be, and to help coordinate transmission lines and make sure that states were working together. And the reason why this makes sense from a federal perspective is that as you're building pipelines from Tennessee to Arkansas, you need to make sure that these states are working together and that there is a neutral third party to make sure that no one is price gouging and that the utility rates ultimately downstream are going to be comparable. In sum, FERC kind of regulates wholesale energy production from a federal perspective. Now, the other important regulatory body or law that you need to be aware of is the PURPA, or the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act. The PURPA in 1978 was designed to create QFs, or qualifying facilities, that would compete with monopolistic or completely vertically oriented utility companies to promote competition and to promote more sustainable alternatives for energy production. So the main purposes of the PURPA, it's fun to say, were to instill 5 general principles. The first was to create a market for utility and power so that consumers could have some competition. The other was to create efficiencies by using cogeneration, by allowing multiple energy sources to contribute to the grid. The other was to end promotional rate structures. What this means is that utility companies, by being a monopoly that controlled production of energy as well as distribution of the power lines and grid systems and meterings and all the other stuff, they could incentivize wholesale rates or discounted rates for certain buyers that would price smaller upstarts out of the market, and this eliminated that practice. The other is to encourage development of hydroelectric power. It's now been expanded to solar and other renewable energy opportunities as well. And the conservation of electric energy and natural gas in whole was a goal of the PURPA. So right now, solar companies are working under the regulation of local authorities under the PURPA Act, which allow retail consumers of solar electricity to consume solar power and sell it back to the grid under retail pricing structures. Now, this means that they're getting more money per kilowatt hour than they would if it were wholesale. And this is where the major changes may be coming forward. So now we get into the issue at hand. So in April, the FERC allowed an open questioning period to begin modifying their regulations and to allow people and lobbyists to submit complaints or submit revisions. So the issue at hand is a petition signed and put forward by the NERA, which is the New England Ratepayers Association. And they argue that by giving retail solar rooftops a price per kilowatt hour that is more expensive than the wholesale cost of power, they're actually transmitting extra costs to non-renewable users of power and everyone else on the grid, essentially. So this has large implications. This means that the excess kilowatt hours that our solar roof is producing is going to be compensated much less. Now, in general, producing more than you consume isn't really economical on the whole because of this discounted rate. This means that it could be discounted even further. Now, due to seasonal variation, it's always advisable to produce a little bit more during low demand periods of the year. If up north, that may be in the summertime, and if you're down south, it may be in the wintertime, so that you can compensate and keep your overall operational costs low. And this is achieved through net metering. So this petition could bring about some very key changes. Question now is, well, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, of course, we don't know. We have until June 15th for the FERC to weigh in on this petition and decide whether or not they're going to change their pricing structure and entertain the idea of regulating retail solar production under wholesale pricing schemes, as opposed to keeping it under the jurisdiction and guidance of each state. But there are some potential downstream effects that we should at least consider. The first is that current net metering systems will no longer be applicable, and we won't exactly know when we're building a system out or pricing it what we can actually expect to pay and what we can expect to get paid by the utility company for excess kilowatt hours that we produce with solar. The other problem is that retail solar installers may be left in the dark and not actually up to speed on guidance, and therefore they may suspend a lot of their solar projects. And that's probably the biggest immediate impact, is that a lot of things are going to be put on hold because we don't know where things are going to be in the next weeks and months. Another issue is that currently net metering requires one box to communicate between your solar panels and the grid, but this may not be up to code from a federal regulatory standpoint. So additional meters would increase the upfront expenses when you're installing a solar panel. The other major concern is increased regulatory cost. So individual consumers, retailers, and installers may need to register not only with state and local authorities, but now with federal authorities as well. Another thing that may be required is for individual people to register with the federal government as basically a QF, or a qualifying facility, as if we were our own power plant, which could delay installation time, increase permitting costs and fees, and ultimately slow down a lot of projects from production because of all these uncertainties and additional costs. And lastly, come tax season, it could be a whole new can of worms in terms of accurately documenting what your income from your generated revenue would be if the wholesale pricing is put into place. So the bottom line is, we don't know where this is heading, but for those of you who are concerned about how the government is handling renewable energy and how it may affect downstream solar production, if you're thinking about getting panels put in, it's a good idea to keep your eye on some of this stuff. It seems like that this petition will now centralize the reimbursement scheme and again take authority out of the local jurisdictions where I personally think it could be best handled, and centralize it in a way that ultimately discounts energy production and could price people out of a renewable energy option. So as it stands now, states that currently have net metering could suffer. States that don't have net metering could benefit. In the short term, it's really not going to have much of an impact. But for big commercial projects and for big township or citywide enterprises, particularly if you're producing, thousands of kilowatts or megawatts of production, this could be a huge, huge change. So I'm going to link down to some articles and resources so you can get informed. Again, if you happen to be in the Northeast, in the New England area, you can obviously write to the NERA to get some information and to see how this may ultimately affect you. There is a push from the government, particularly on the left, to expose the composition of the NERA, particularly where their funding sources are from, to uncover whether or not they may have other incentives from natural gas, oil, or coal producers that may be getting priced up in the current system, to see what their real priorities are. But it does seem to be that if this comes to pass, this is going to be a huge question mark in terms of how new solar projects are going to be priced and what you can expect. So if you're bringing a contractor out to the house, see if they have received any insight or guidance from their local governments and jurisdictions as to how they expect this to play out and whether or not it's actually going to trickle down to any change on an individual level. So I hope this was helpful. Please consider subscribing, and we'll see you next time. Thanks again for watching Saving Green. Bye.